Lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. Speak with great honor. Suffering.
And attain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He is my Lord, and he fills my heart. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates, by him nature is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character.
Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and Lord and master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds. We take shelter of your lotus feet. Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. All right. Goranga. All righty. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Cartels. So today is actually a special day on the Vaishnava calendar. It's actually Bhismastami, and we're going to be speaking about that today in class instead of normal Bhagavatam class. So, of course, anyway, let's chant Jai Radhamadhava and then I'll explain it. Jaya Radhamadhava Kunja Vihare Jaya Radhamadhava Kunja Vihare Gopijana Malaba Hiri Bharat Hare Gopijana Malaba Hiri Bharat Hare Yasodanandana Prajachananandana Sodanandana Prajachana Ranjana Tira Manachade Yamuna Tira Manachade Jayurad Madhava Kunda Vihati Paramahansa Paragacharya Ositeta Satashi Shimad, His Divine Grace Savaya Chanananda Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Huidas Thakur Ki Jai Rem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavanam Ki Jai Maturidam Ki Jai Jagadada Sami Ki Jai Yamunamai Ki Jai Shrimati Lassi Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is to Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Budle Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharni Nivashesha Shinyavadi Paschatcha Dejatani. So Om Gana Timadanda Shagaranjana Shalakya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shikadave Namaha. So, today is a very special day in the Vaishnava calendar. It's celebrated actually all over India. It's called Bhismastami. Astami, of course, means the 8th day of the moon, either the full moon or the new moon. So, the significance of this day in Indian tradition is that if it can free you, if you celebrate this particular day, perform certain austerities on this day, and hear about Grandfather Bhisma, it can actually free you from the debts to the ancestors. Of course, we understand, according to Madhavendra Puri, that if one performs devotional service, then one doesn't have any more debts to ancestors or demigods or anything like that. But it's considered a very, very special day in many parts of India, this Bhismastami, and it's some consider it the time when Bhisma actually ascended back to Godhead, because when Bhisma was lying on the bed of arrows, after he was shot full of arrows, and we're going to tell that story in a few minutes, he had the blessings of not dying until he wanted to die. And he chose specifically the moment when the sun again comes to the north, starts to come to the north, right after the sun comes to the north, which is the winter, called winter solstice. Some of you may be aware of that. It's December 23rd generally. There's different equinoxes, which is the spring equinox, the fall equinox, the winter solstice. That's the shortest day of the year for those in the northern hemisphere. We're in the northern hemisphere. And now the days are actually getting a little longer. And of course, when it comes daylight savings time, which was not mentioned in the Vedic literatures, then it gets darker in the morning and lighter in the evening. So anyway, so many people say it was the day he actually chose to leave this world after he spoke to the Pandavas, and we'll be speaking about those particular messages in a few minutes. So, several things about Grandfather Bhisma before we tell his story is that some people question how Grandfather Bhisma could have done something so adharmic as to have fought on the wrong side of the battle of Kurukshetra, and also just to have sat there or stood there while there was the attempted disrobing of Draupadi. I mean, that's pretty horrendous. I mean, I know if someone attempted that here, whatever, I would have gotten really angry and done something, if I had a gun especially. I would have called it Dvibhuj.
I would have been there with you.
Yeah, Dvibhuj would have helped me, because I'm not that much of a fighter. So the question is, why did Grandfather Bhisma sit there? I mean, he objected to it. Why did he just go along with it? I mean, it's a really interesting question, because he's also a Mahajan. And Mahajan means Dwadasa Mahajan. There's 12 great personalities like Grandfather Bhisma and Bali Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, and Lord Brahma, etc. So, how is it possible? And we understand from the Mahabharata, in the discussion between Yudhisthira and Yamaraj, that the Mahajana set the example for everybody else, isn't it? Mahajana Yena Gatasa Panta. The verse in the Mahabharata is Tarko Pratishta Shutina Vibhina. That no one can understand how to act or what the absolute truth is simply by reading the Vedas. Why is that? Because Vibhina, that the Vedas are multi-branched. Krishna also says that in the Gita, doesn't he? Trigunya Vishya Veda Nish Trigunya Bhavarjana. He says the Vedas mainly deal with 3 modes of nature. So if you try to look at the, and also in the Brahma Samhita, Vedeshu Durlabham Durlabham Atma Bhakto, like the verse we quoted yesterday, that you won't understand Krishna or the absolute truth, or basically any absolute fact, by reading the Vedic literatures. And Tarko Pradishta, nor by logic and reasoning can one achieve those things. And also that's stated by Jad Bharata to King Rahugana. He says, Rahuganai tata pasananyati anacheja nirvat panad grahadva nachandasanaiva jalagna suryar bana mahagpada vijobishado. That, my dear King Rahugana, you're not going to be able to understand or realize the absolute truth by tapasa, by austerities, by making yourself cold in the winter or hot in the summer, nor by becoming a sannyasi or becoming a good grahasta, simply by taking shelter, abhishek, by taking an abhishek, basically, of the dust of the lotus feet of the great pure devotees. In other words, without approaching a devotee or Mahajana, one can't understand anything. So here's Grandfather Bhisma, he's a Mahajana. And the question is, he's sitting there, or standing there, where there's the attempted disrobing of Draupadi, he's trying to kill the Pandavas, he's fighting on the wrong side of the battle, etc. What's happening there? Why has he acted so improperly? And there's 2 explanations the Acharyas give. One is the Prabhupada gives, which is a really interesting explanation, and which is applicable to us, that because Grandfather Bhisma, Dronacharya, Kripacharya, etc., were eating food cooked in Duryodhana's kitchen, their minds became wicked. And that's actually, it's interesting, I was reading the Mahabharata, the full version of the Mahabharata, not the abridged version, and the Mahabharata actually says the same thing. It says that once upon a time, Duryodhana wanted to commit suicide. And the reason he wanted to commit suicide is that he was saved from the Gandharvas by Arjuna. You may know that story. And he thought, I was saved by Arjuna, my mortal enemy, this is it, I'm finished. This is so embarrassing. As Krishna says in the Gita, for one who has been honored, dishonor is worse than death. That's for Kshatriya, not for Brahmins. For Brahman, he doesnk care, like Lord Rishabhadev, he just walked out and everybody was just throwing things at him and everything, and he thought, Hare Krishna. But for a Kshatriya, it's like death to be dishonored. I mean, that's why they enjoy fighting, because if they die, it's preferable, because they go to heaven, right? In a religious war. So, anyway, getting back to Grandfather Bhisma, he was eating food cooked in Duryodhana's kitchen. And basically, when you eat food, cooked, impure food, Prabhupada says the mind becomes wicked. So here's Duryodhana. Previously, anyway, going back to the story, so Duryodhana was getting ready to commit suicide. And when he was in meditation, stopping eating and whatever, the other demons actually took him out of his body and gave him a pep talk. They said, like you see sometimes in the middle of the football game, the football team is losing, and so they huddle, bunch of gorillas. So anyway, they had a pep talk. They said, "Don't worry, we're going to be able to take over, and inhabit the consciousness of Grandfather Bhisma and Dronacharya and Kripacharya." Can you imagine that? Be possession, actually, by demons. So it's a fact that if one does impure things, one can be possessed by demoniac influences. For example, if you eat impure food, or if you don't, even there's stories in the Mahabharata about if you don't wash your hands at the right time, you do something dirty, that's an impurity, or sometimes Prabhupada would mention that if you salivate, in the middle of the night, drool, as they say, the demons can come in. So therefore, when I sleep, I actually take my mouth shut. I do. I'm not because of the demons. I'm not worried about demons. It helps with apnea. You can look that up on the internet if you're interested. I can talk to you later about it. But anyway, so the demon. So if you're not careful, there's all sorts of demoniac influences around the atmosphere. Krishna says in the Gita, "Karnam guna sangashya sadasad janma jonishu." The cause of our entanglement is guna sangha, association with gunas. So if you associate with the lower modes of nature, that affects your consciousness. Or if you're in a place where the lower modes of nature are, your consciousness will be affected. Just like we're here in the temple and our consciousness becomes elevated. And then as soon as we walk out the door, we want to fight with each other. Not really, hopefully not. So different things, or people affect our consciousness, music affects our consciousness, or food affects the consciousness, especially food, according to the Ayurveda, becomes transferred or transformed into blood. And what does the blood do? It carries the consciousness, right? Like if you get a transfusion from a demon, you wake up one morning, you want to eat your children or something like that. and even, Krishna's own son, Boma, became a demon because of bad association. Or our gorilla friend, Dridvita, he became a demon. He was actually a servant of Lord Ram. And of course he offended Lakshman, that's another story. But he had some issues with Lakshman. But he offended Lakshman, he had bad association, and he became a demon. So I'm not saying that Grandfather Bhisma was a demon, but he was possessed because he ate food, cooked impure food. Prabhupada actually said this: you eat impure food cooked by someone, or that is cooked by someone who is impure consciousness, the mind becomes wicked. Prabhupada said that. It's not a joke. It's actually true. I mean, I'll tell you my own experience with that, is that many years ago, before any of you were born, including Dweepush, I was a brahmachari assistant to a sannyasi. His name was Hridayananda Maharaj, to protect the innocent. So, no, this is story. We both realized this. So we were traveling, and he said, "You're traveling with a sannyasi now. So basically, we can, why take the trouble to cook? We can just go into the supermarket and Sri Vishnu things." Sri Vishnu? You heard that expression before? I don't know if Prabhupada ever used that expression. Did he? I don't remember Prabhupada ever saying anything about Sri Vishnu in anything. But devotees got into this, pick up some water. Sri Vishnu, Sri Vishnu, Sri Vishnu. Pick up some, go to the supermarket, Sri Vishnu, the whole supermarket, except for those things which could be offered. We did that. I'm not just making that up. Many of us did that, isn't it, Gokul?
I never did it.
Yeah, but people, when I'm traveling Sankirtan a lot, they did that. So we
I
would,
definitely remember water. You couldn't drink water. You're standing in line to use water. You had to say Shri Vishnu.
Vishnu, Shri Vishnu, Shri Vishnu. But Prabhupada never said it.
Is it part of a yajna when you do a fire sacrifice?
Yeah, well, that's part of the yajna. Shri Vishnu, Shri Vishnu, Shri Vishnu. And I don't know where it came from. But anyway, so the point is, getting back to the story, so we would go into the supermarket and we'd buy just whatever we liked, you know. We had no meat, fish, or eggs, obviously. We weren't eating lobsters or anything. So we buy this nice, what was called oro wheat bread. Some of you may have heard of that before. It was a natural bread. And we bought, grains cooked by by people who were not in Krishna consciousness. I'm not going to use the word, it's a silly thing to say.
Motive.
What?
They're cooked by people with a profit motive.
With a profit motive, or who were thinking impure thoughts while they were cooking it. I mean, even I read one book when I was in the university before I became Krishna conscious, how people would just throw all sorts of things, into the coleslaw, or somebody fell into the soda one day and they dissolved him. So, but in any case, it's impure. And so we noticed after 2 or 3 days that we were starting to argue with each other a lot, more than normal. Because we did argue. It's a fact. I mean, I always had like a back and forth relationship with Rita Nanamarj. But he's one of my very, very, very best friends. So with friends, you argue. I mean, that's life, isn't it? That's part of loving exchanges. I was listening to Prabhupada said that without fighting, there's no life. Because Prabhupada said it comes from the spiritual world. You think you can have no fighting in the material world? And Prabhupada said, friends, they fight and then they eat together, chivalry, like that. So there's nothing wrong with that. We should learn how to fight with each other. And then love each other simultaneously. So anyway, so we noticed after 2 or 3 days there's more fighting, and consciousness was a little taking a nosedive, so to speak. And so then we attributed that to what we were eating. And so even though it was very austere, he arranged and I arranged to have one of these kerosene stoves, and I would roll chapatis on the wheel well of a maxi van. Maybe you don't know what a maxi van is. Some of old folks know what that is. It's like a cargo van. And there's a wheel well where the metal goes up over the rear wheel. And so that was my table. And I would cook while he was driving the van. And you imagine kerosene, and anyway, I think you can understand how dangerous it was. I could have easily blown up, And it's a funny story that he was doing that, and I would say, "What are you doing? I'm driving." And we had some liquids on the stove too. He said, "I'm just teaching you how to think of Krishna." You put, like Krishna says, Yashaham anugranami harishe tadadam shanai. For those who I especially favor, I take away everything. Or I put them in difficult circumstances. So he was doing that. But anyway, so we learned, the point of the story is that we actually learned how important it was to eat pure food cooked by devotees. And so Prabhupada also said to us that if you cook for yourself, you like what you eat. He also said that too. And he said if you like what you eat, you'll digest it and you'll be healthy. So really some hints to Prabhupada. So we should like what we eat. That's why I don't try to impose my diet on other people. Because they would get very angry. So, and you digest it. And Prabhupada said, in this way you get all the vitamins and minerals you need. Because why? Krishna is Jamadagni. What is Jamadagni? He's the fire of digestion. And if he's pleased, and if you have good consciousness, you can eat nails. Not that you should. And you'll actually be healthy. And that's why you have the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. You know, you hear about these austerities like eating a little buttermilk every few days or 2 days or something like that. But they were deriving all the nutrition. They lived full lives. If you read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, you'll see that here is someone who's so incredibly intelligent. It's not that he had some nutritional deficiency or something, or Raghunath Das Goswami's literature is Manashiksha or something, isn't it? I mean, it's not, even though they were eating very, very little, their brains were sharp because Krishna was pleased. So we cannot, of course, we cannot imitate. So anyway, so that's one of the reasons that Grandfather Bhisma, even though he's a Mahajan, acted as he did, because he was eating impure food. Prabhupada was the one who gave that reason. And the Mahabharata gives that reason. So that's a lesson for us. And another reason that Grandfather Bhisma acted improperly was that he had a misunderstanding of Dharma, even though he was a Mahajan. And that was brought out in the final parva, the Shanti parva, or no, the Bhisma parva, of the Mahabharata, in which he's describing what his fault was. It was a very interesting discussion at the end. He's saying that truthfulness or one's vow should be kept, except where it results in a negative result. In other words, one judges ethics by the result rather than by the principle, by the details, sorry, not principle, but by the details. That's called, in ethical studies, that's called consequentialism. Does everybody understand the consequences? Consequences means the consequences of an action. So, in other words, if something is apparently ethical but will result in extremely negative results, then you have to really think whether you should keep that. In other words, Grandfather Bhisma's, speaking specifically, his promise to always support the king or the emperor, at that time happened to be Dhritarashtra, was an ethical promise, but because it had unethical results by keeping that promise, he should have broken the promise. Does that make sense? Yes. He should have broken the promise and stopped the attempted disrobing of Draupadi. He should have stopped the battle of Kurukshetra. And of course, that was the battle of Kurukshetra was Krishna's plan to just kill everybody at once, all the demons. But that's another thing. But just looking at it from one angle, if he had not fought on the side of the Kurus, there would have been no war. Because Duryodhana would not have had the courage to fight without Grandfather Bhisma, especially if Grandfather Bhisma was on the other side. So Grandfather Bhisma in the Mahabharata makes this apparently clear in his instructions to Yudhisthira Maharaj. He tells a story to illustrate his own fault. And that story is as follows, that he says, once upon a time, there were a bunch of dacoits, or in India called gundas, dacoits, who were following a family, and they wanted to kill the family for one reason or other. I mean, I don't know why. It's not described there. And so this family wanted to hide from the dacoits. And where did they pick to hide? Was within the ashram of a great sage. So they went into the ashram. They said, please give us protection. Sage said, yeah, I'll give you protection. So the dacoits come, and they pass by the sage and said, they ask, have you seen this family? And the sage says, I cannot tell a lie. They're in my ashram. Because he cannot tell a lie. And the dacoits kill the family. And the sage had to go to hell. because he didn't break his promise. Now, I'm not saying that, I oftentimes use Grandfather Bhisma as an example as to why or how we should keep our promises, especially that of initiation. But if you break your promise of initiation, it never has a good effect. But there's certain times when one may have to, to protect someone's life. Then you have to break your promise if it's a question. Let's say, all right, let's use a modern day example of when the Nazis were killing people in Germany, and you were hiding some Jewish people in your house. So you would have to lie, right? And there's many stories about that. People protected Jewish people by lying to the Nazis and endangering their own lives. And that's considered very exalted, that someone is sacrificing themselves for others. So that's the second reason Grandfather Bhisma made his mistake, because he was attached to the rule, the details, without understanding the essence. Now that's quite interesting, and also can be applied to us, and sometimes we're attached to certain ways of doing things. For example, I don't want to get too political because it'll get me in trouble. But let's say we want to spread Krishna consciousness in the Western world right now. And the Western world has actually changed, if any of you have noticed, from the time that I was a new devotee to now. So you may have to make certain adjustments. And Prabhupada himself, I was just reading the Madhya Lila, chapter 23 of the Madhya Lila, where Prabhupada was talking about certain rules and regulations apply in India and they may not be applicable in the West, and vice versa. He's talking about details. Just read that. It's definitely very explicit. Prabhupada goes over 2 verses and 2 purports in the 23rd chapter of the Madhya Lila. 23rd chapter of the Madhya Lila is entitled, actually, the goal of life, Krishna Prema. And it's the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami in Benares. So read it. It's really, really interesting. So, in other words, we have to really understand the essence of something, since sometimes details have to be adjusted. If we just stick to, things that were done 5,000 years ago, what? Okay, I'll be political. Let's talk about, whether ladies can be gurus. Oh my God, now everybody's quiet. What is he going to say? Especially here, in North Carolina, I can get away with any damn thing, but here I may get in big trouble. So anyway, talking, people can pull out quotes from the Vedic literatures about this and that, but one really has to consider what is the best thing for spreading Krishna consciousness, and one has to think of whether we're not the body or not, whether we are the body or not. I learned that I wasn't the body. Maybe some other people think they are. So anyway, so one really has to apply one's intelligence and not violate the orders of the spiritual master either. But we have, on the other hand, we have a whole group of devotees who say, yes, Prabhupada adjusted many things. Women should not go in the deity room. Women should not cook. Women should just be in the kitchen rolling rotis all the time. Or at least making bagels. That's a better idea. So anyway, but you have your injunctions, different shlokas for different folks, as they say. And so you really have to use your intelligence how to apply Krishna consciousness without violating the principles of Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada actually says this, one who sticks to simply the details doesn't ignore the purpose of the principles. And the principles to create a revolution in the misdirected lives of an impious civilization, as Bhagavatam says, then then that's Nimagraha, Prabhupada said. I'm quoting basically from these, trying to remember these purports. Nimagraha means following the rules and regulations, but ritualistically and not accomplishing a particular purpose. So our purpose is, the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, to make everybody Krishna conscious, to open up the world for everybody, men, women, children, everybody. And there's a group of people who want to go back to, the ritualistic, Brahminical conception that if you're born in a certain family, then you're Brahmin, etc., like that. But Prabhupada didn't accept that. There's that interesting story that where the devotees went to visit one of Brahmins or something like that, or one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, and the godbrother said, "Oh, you're very nice devotees. If you do your devotional service nicely, in your next life you'll get a chance to be born in Brahmin families." And when they told that to Prabhupada, Prabhupada said that you should go back and tell him if he does his Brahminical work nicely, in his next life he'll get a chance to be born in the Western world in the Hare Krishna movement. So, sometimes we really get into these Niyamagraha stuffs that have nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, they were just applicable according to a certain time, place, and circumstance. Okay, so that was my preaching for today. So let's talk more about Grandfather Bhisma. I have all these issues I'd like to get into. So here's Grandfather Bhisma's history. It's really interesting that once upon a time, there were these 8 Vasus. They're great personalities in heavenly planets. And the head, the oldest one, his name was Jal, D-Y-A-U. And his wife wanted the desire cow from Vashishta Muni. Vashishta Muni had this wonderful desire cow, produce anything he wanted, not only milk, but ice cream, cheese, bagels, and things like that. But whatever, soldiers. Actually, there's stories with Bhismastami Muni, how the cow produced soldiers. So what he did is, under his wife's instruction, he and the other Vasus, they stole the cow. And then they got cursed, because they stole the cow, to take birth on the Earth planet. And so they were really upset, and they were thinking, we have to take birth on the Earth planet. Oh, actually, first they begged to Vashishta Muni, please forgive us. And Vashishta Muni said, all right, the one who is most responsible has to live the same length of life that all of you would have to live. The rest of you will just have a short life on the Earth planet. So then they're thinking, we need a good mother if we're going to take birth. That's the most important thing. More important than the father is the mother. So they were looking around, and they saw Ganga Devi. And Ganga Devi said, yes, I'll be your mother, because actually I want to go down to the Earth planet, because I'm in love with this king Mahabish, who's going to take birth on the Earth, because this king Mahabish was cursed to go down to the Earth planet, even though he was in the heavenly planets, because he looked at me improperly. He was cursed by Lord Brahma. So, therefore, I'll be happy to be your mother. And they said, here's the deal, Mom. Kill each one of us after we're born. And then don't kill the final one. So, she goes down to the Earth planet, just to make a long story short, and there's Shantanu, who was Mahabish, King Mahabish in his last life. And he's walking by the Ganges, and he sees this beautiful Ganga Devi. And, as a kid, he said, they're passionate. They're not just like, Hare Krishna, I'm not supposed to be a Maya. Like some brahmacharis, isn't it? There's a Maya Devi. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare. Did you ever see stuff like that? Go cool, you ever see stuff like that?
I'm afraid I didn't.
Well, those of us who distributed books with brahmacharis before, we saw a lot of that stuff. So, Maya. So, but he's a Kshatriya, so he's thinking, there's nothing wrong. He's thinking, okay, let's get married. And he doesn't see a wedding ring or whatever, a Mangala Sutra on her. And he says to her, let's get married. She says, okay, it's a deal. But you can't disagree with me. It's a prenuptial contract. And if you disagree with me, I'm out of here. And he says, I would never disagree with you. That's love. It lasts for about 6 months. So I will never disagree with you. And so he exchanges garlands with her. It's a Gandharva marriage. They get married, and he's just like enamored with her until she starts to kill each one of the kids. The first kid, he just can't say anything. Second kid, third kid, fourth kid, fifth kid. He's going, oh my God, what kind of wife did I marry? If I say anything, she's gone, and I'll lose the love of my life. It shows actually the dangers of lust, isn't it? That you actually are willing to put up with garbage. Not just garbage, cruelty, immorality, criminality because of lust. It's hellish. One should be ethical. So anyway, get to the 7th, she kills the 7th, and then it comes to the 8th, and he just goes, I can't take it anymore. Stop! She said, you disagree with me, honey. I'm out of here. So she takes the boy away, but at least he's happy his son hasn't been killed. And she takes him and gets him educated in politics by Brahaspati, in the Vedas by Vasishtha Muni, and he's taught to fight, martial arts, by Parashuram. So she really gives him a full education. So what happens is that he comes back, to make a long story short, and Shantanu was out one day and he sees that the Ganges water has actually stopped flowing. And he's thinking, why does it stop flowing? He sees all these arrows that have made a dam. He says, who has done this? And he sees his son, Devavrat. And then Ganga Devi says, this is your son, and he accepts the son. And he's very, very happy because Shantanu is very happy because he thinks now he has someone to become the next king. So he says, you're going to become, it's called the Yuvaraj. You're going to become the appointed prince to become the king in the future. So he's extremely happy about that. But then, Shantanu does have this problem of falling in love. So he goes by the Ganges again, and there's this girl, Satyavati, who's also the mother of Vyasadeva. And she's a boatman, a fisherman's daughter. And she's rowing a boat, taking people across the Ganges. And he sees her, and she has this amazing smell. She's called Gandha Yojana, which means her perfume goes for 8 miles. And the reason for that is she was blessed by Parishara Muni previously, because he had a kid, Vyasadeva, with her, and he blessed her that you're not going to smell like a fish anymore. And so she was a fisherman's daughter. I mean, there's a whole story about how she was also the daughter of King Basu. So you're not going to smell like a fish. And so he just falls in love with her, and he's told by her father that basically you cannot marry my daughter because her son has to become the next king. And he goes into a funk at that point, depression. And he's depressed. Bhisma can't understand what's happening with dad. Finally he finds out, and he goes to the fisherman and the fisherman's daughter, makes a deal, basically, that he will not become the king and he will not get married. These are the promises that he kept. And he will always serve the king. And his father says, okay, because you made that deal, I bless you. And Prabhupada said that the father's blessings in those days were actually very powerful. They really held. And so I bless you, you're not going to die unless you want to. Now you might think that's a great blessing, but sometimes it's a curse.
Yes.
You just have to stand around as your whole dynasty is being destroyed. So then, Satyavati, who marries Shantanu, they have some kids, Vichitravira and Chitrangada, and Chitrangada is killed by a Gandharva. Vichitravira is a little weak, so Bhisma has to find some wives for him. So he goes out, this is practically the whole story of the Mahabharata, but I'm not going to tell the whole story of the Mahabharata. So he goes out and he kidnaps the king, the daughters of the king of Kashi, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. And so he kidnaps them, and they come back with him to marry Vichitravira. But Amba tells him, I've fallen in love with Shalva, so you have to return me. So he returns Amba, but Shalva won't take her back because that's an embarrassment for a Kshatriya. Kshatriya is not supposed to take charity. And so he rejects her, and Amba comes back and says that I want to marry you, Bhisma. And Bhisma says, I'm a brahmachari, plus I'm not going to marry anybody who hates my guts. And so he rejects her. Finally, she goes to Parashuram. Parashuram tries to convince Bhisma to marry Amba. Amba even has a fight with Bhisma, and Bhisma wins the fight. So Amba becomes so upset, she performs austerities to Lord Shiva that she'll be born in her next life to kill or be the cause of the death of Bhisma. So in her next life, this is really interesting, she is born, most devotees don't know this whole story, so I'm going to tell it. She is born as a lady, Drupada's daughter, okay? But Lord Shiva tells Drupada that she is a boy. So he has so much faith in Lord Shiva that even though she has all the appearances of a girl, she's a boy. That's real faith, isn't it? That's blind faith. What is it? Walks like a duck, talks like a duck. It's a duck. So anyway, he has so much faith. So he arranges a marriage of his daughter with another girl, thinking my daughter is a boy. Blind faith. And so there's a marriage, and the other girl discovers that her husband is actually a girl, and it's not the modern time, so it's not really acceptable. And so her father, the second girl's father, decides to attack Drupada's kingdom because he feels insulted. And then this Shikandi at this particular point feels guilty about the whole thing. That's the daughter. That's the daughter who was supposed to be a boy. That she goes out to the forest to commit suicide. She runs into a yaksha named Stunavarna. And the yaksha says, I can help you. I'll give you my masculinity in exchange for your femininity. So she goes back, and she's a man at this point, Shikandi. It's interesting. And so she was a girl, and she becomes a man. This is the whole Mahabharata story. This is not the abbreviated version. Yeah. So most people don't know this part. And so the yaksha says to her, just right after making things straight, come back and I'll become a man again. Okay. But in the meantime, Kuvera comes to visit the yaksha and becomes so upset that his yaksha friend has become a woman that he curses him to remain a woman until Shikandi dies. So Shikandi is always a man. It's not like that the movie, the Mahabharata, is completely wrong, the way they depict the whole thing. It's always a man after this particular point. And the Shikandi is going to be the cause of the death of grandfather Bhisma. So anyway, so that's the story of Shikandi. So then finally, fast forward, there's a battle of Kurukshetra. I want to get to some points. Not going too long. Bhisma is the commander-in-chief. He doesn't fight seriously with Arjuna. Duryodhana is taunting Bhisma. You're not fighting seriously. So Bhisma says, I have 5 arrows. With these 5 arrows, I'm going to kill the 5 Pandavas tomorrow. I'm powering these 5 arrows. So then, Krishna knows what's happening. He has Arjuna go to Duryodhana, who's keeping these 5 arrows safely, and begs for the 5 arrows. So Krishna is so tricky. He's the most tricky god I know. And so Bhisma's lost his 5 arrows, but still he gets taunted by Duryodhana. And Duryodhana taunts him so much, because Bhima says, I've given him all my potency, these 5 arrows, so I can't give another 5 arrows. But the next day he vows either to kill Arjuna or cause Krishna to break his promise, because we know Krishna has promised not to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra. And he is successful in getting Krishna to break his promise, because Krishna runs forward towards him with a chariot wheel to kill him. It's a famous picture, of course, we've all seen the picture. And then Arjuna is actually holding on to Krishna's legs. Don't do this. It's embarrassing. I'll fight him seriously from now on. And Krishna says, okay, but from now on you got to be serious about this fighting, not just like, treat him like your grandfather anymore. So then Arjuna is fighting seriously, and then Krishna tells him, use a Shikhandi as a shield, a human shield. And so he uses Shikhandi as a human shield, and he fires his arrows at Grandfather Bhisma behind Shikhandi, and then Grandfather Bhisma is filled with so many arrows that it's described in the Mahabharata, you can't even put your finger between the arrows.
Shikhandi was a woman at this point.
No, man.
A man. Okay.
He's always a man until he's killed.
Okay.
Not a woman until he's killed.
Okay.
Remember that, because the Yaksha was cursed.
But Bhisma had never vowed.
But Bhisma vowed never to kill someone who's a woman or previously was a woman. And he knew it was Shikhandi. I mean, they knew. He also knew it was Amba because he knew about Lord Shiva, the austerities, Lord Shiva's benediction. And they knew about past lives and everything. So he knew exactly. And then he just put down his arms, and Arjuna was just filling him with arrows. And he still kept rushing at Arjuna. This is the Kshatriya determination. Like most of us, I mean, if you even scratch me, I'd be crying for my mother. Isn't it? Isn't it? This little scratch. I go, oh my God, what's that? I want my mother to come and kiss it and make it better. So, isn't when we were young, it was like that. And so, can you imagine even one arrow in you? I mean, Dvibush had some bullets in you before, right? Didn't you? You had a bullet in you? Was it painful?
Yeah, I had some bullets go through me, yeah.
Can you imagine hundreds of bullets?
No, I can't imagine one bullet.
like all the arrows stuck in your body, and you couldn't even fit your finger, finger's width between them. He didn't do the head. Arjuna obviously didn't shoot at Bhisma's head, but everywhere else. And Bhisma was still rushing at him. And finally he had to shoot enough so to just knock Bhisma over on his back. And can you imagine that? And Bhisma was lying on his back. Actually, there's a whole description of the Mahabharata. He was thirsty. Because obviously, really makes you thirsty being filled with arrows. And so Arjuna actually fired an arrow into the ground, and the Ganges came out and went into Bhisma's mouth, and also he made a pillow of arrows behind Bhisma just to support his head. So Bhisma was lying like that. And Krishna, in the Mahabharata, full edition of Mahabharata, Krishna gives him the benediction, your mind is going to be clear. So you're going to be able to speak clearly. And now we're going to talk about what Bhisma mentioned. In addition to what I mentioned in the beginning about consequentialism, remember I mentioned that? Mm-hmm. That something is determined ethical or not ethical according to the consequences. I mean, it's like Srila Prabhupada, for example. He came to the Western world, and some of the things that were just like rules in the Gaudiya Math, he violated. Like having women live in the ashram, right? That was a rule. No way. And Prabhupada, even as a sannyasi, was teaching the first lady in the movement how to wear a sari. Jadharani, isn't it? Because none of the Westerners knew how to wear a sari. What do you do with it? And so, for a sannyasi doing that, or associating, Prabhupada had to live with people who were eating meat. When Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went into someone's house and they tried to give him liquor, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so upset, this is a story in the Chaitanya Leela, that Lord Chaitanya jumped in the Ganges to purify himself. And it's described, even if you see the face of someone who's not Krishna conscious, you're supposed to jump in the Ganges immediately without even taking your clothes off or putting on a bathing suit. Can you imagine if we followed that injunction? We'd have to walk around all day long with a little spray bottle. Okay, I can talk to you now. So...
He also initiated women.
Yeah, he initiated women.
Would only initiate the married couple.
Yeah, married couples. And we find devotees now who want to go back to that standard, violating Prabhupada's. No comments. And Prabhupada gave ladies, very unique, he gave ladies Brahma Gayatri. Gaudiya Math, even if they were initiated, the ladies didn't get the Brahma Gayatri. Prabhupada was the first one to do that. First one. Mahajaniyena Gata Sapanta. So, but look at Prabhupada's success. His godbrothers went to Europe, and I think one lady in the UK became a devotee, Vinod Vani, and one of Prabhupada's godbrothers became a devotee too. One of the Europeans, German, became a devotee too. But basically, it wasn't a whole explosion. And when Prabhupada first went to America, he wanted to preach to, the upper class in New York. So he went to the upper class section. But then later on, he ended up in the Lower East Side, in the Bowery. And then he had basically all of us. We weren't lower class. And Prabhupada had to live with people with animal food in their refrigerator, people who took LSD, isn't it? All these things are prohibited for Vaishnava, or even an old Vaishnava leaving India. But Prabhupada did this. It's amazing. Because paleta padachiyate, you judge something by the results. So Prabhupada showed that actually the essence of Krishna consciousness is to basically carry out Lord Chaitanya's mission. Wherever you go, you become guru. And Prabhupada, because of that, we're here today. Because Prabhupada was not ritualistic, Prabhupada understood the essence, he understood the things that could be changed and the things that couldn't be changed. He didn't change the Mahamantra, he didn't change the essence, he didn't change the Tattva or the Siddhanta, but he adjusted things so that all of us could be here. From 64 rounds to the 32 to 16, right? Can you imagine if we had to have people chant 64 rounds and take initiation? How many of us would be here?
You may.
Me? No. I'd be a professor in some university with a big family somewhere, suffering like hell, So anyways, so really that's an important principle. You judge by the results. And Prabhupada understood that perfectly. That's why he was an acharya, because he understood that absolutely perfectly, what to adjust, what not to adjust, and how not to violate the principles of Krishna consciousness. And the proof is the success. Panayana padachiyate. So anyway, so apart from that, I'm going to talk a little bit, trying not to go on too long, about Bhisma's final instructions for all human beings. Obviously he gave instructions in Niti Shastra, which I'm not going to talk about right now, how to be a king to Yudhisthira, because Yudhisthira felt so guilty after the Battle of Kurukshetra that Yudhisthira wanted to renounce the kingdom, because he felt he was the cause of the death of all these different soldiers. Millions and millions of different soldiers died. So he was feeling extremely guilty. So Bhisma had to really give him a pep talk to encourage him to become the king. So apart from that, Bhisma is giving him some instructions ethical instructions, which are really, really useful for all of us, whether you're a king or whether you're a president of a temple. And so, here are his instructions. And the first one you will all love, not to become angry, but except, like you see, Prabhupada became angry sometimes, but to protect religious principles, it's important to become angry. Like for Kshatriya, or someone who's managing to protect religious principles, if you see some adharmic thing. But not to become angry because of frustration, which Bhagavad Gita talks about, jayate vasha, sangos tesha vajayate, but contemplating sense objects, you become frustrated, angry, etc. Not angry for oneself, but angry for... But one has to be careful not to be controlled by anger. One can use anger as an instrument. It's just like if you have a gun, you don't become controlled by the gun. Or, let me give a story from the Ramayana about this. Once upon a time, Sita and Ram were in the forest, and Ram had his bow. And Sita said, I get really nervous because you have that bow. And Ram said, why? And Sita said, because you have that bow, you're going to use it, and it's going to contaminate your consciousness. And Sita even preached to him. You have this whole vision of Sita as a submissive lady, never talking back to Ram. Ain't true. She started to preach to Ram. She told Ram a story. She said, my dear Lord, Ram, that once upon a time there was a sage, and the sage was performing austerities, and Indra became very upset with the sage's austerities because Indra thinks normally that sages want to go to heaven to take over his position. So many times Indra sends down, dancing girls and things like that. But with this particular sage, he just gave the sage a bow. And then as soon as he had a bow, he started becoming cruel, and he fell down. So it's like interesting. Like in America, they say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But in one sense, if you don't have control of your senses, you put a gun in people's hands, and then it pulls you into the mode. I remember when I was young, nowadays they don't give kids guns so much anymore. I mean, toy guns. Yeah. But we all had toy guns when I was young, and we had these little cap rolls. You know what I'm talking about? And nowadays, if you have, the police will probably shoot you because they're really on hair trigger when they see something that looks like a gun. But as soon as you put it in my hands, boom, I got you. So I remember as a child, I pointed it to Ibuja, and no, we weren't children together. I was from the north. So anyway, I was a Yankee. So as soon as you have it in your hands, isn't it? Does anyone experience that when they were young? You just start shooting. Yep. Boom! Gotcha! And you put me in a paintball place. You know paintball? Yeah. Then it's so much fun. You're just shooting people. Boom! Gotcha! Or you go to the shooting galleries. Or you go to the state fairs where you win a Cupid doll. You know what that is? And you just shoot these little characters. So there's something about having a weapon in your hand that changes your consciousness. It's interesting, isn't it? So Sita Devi was preaching to Ram about this. Is that you're going to change your consciousness, Ram? Ram said, don't worry. I'm Ram. I vowed to protect the sages. What do you want me to do? Just say to the Rakshasas, please don't do that. Please be nice. They said, no, I have to kill. So anger is important sometimes. The second one, Grandfather Bhisma says, is not to lie. And of course, then he qualifies that in terms of the consequences. Next one is if you have wealth, you distribute it equally to people. You don't just hoard it for yourself. And we know in Kali Yuga that hoarding wealth causes Kali to become manifest, right? Next principle is to forgive, which is really important, because oftentimes we harbor these grudges against people. Isn't it someone does something to me? Like even in the Bible it says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You did it. You know, it's like little kids basically. Who started the fight? He hit first, Mommy. It doesn't matter. Jesus Christ says you hit you on one cheek, you turn the other cheek. So you forgive. Forgiveness is divine. Prabhupada actually said that's a Brahminical quality, to forgive. The next one is to beget children only with one's wife. That's a big one in Kali Yuga. It may sound just common sense, but next one is to be pure in mind and hygienic in body. You know, like Prabhupada said, Oma Papatra Pavitrava Sarvavashtam Gatopiva Yaksmarit Pundarikaksham Zavaya Vyantura Shuchi Shri Vishnu Shri Vishnu Shri Vishnu. By remembering Krishna, your mind becomes or remains pure, and by taking bath, Brahminical initiation, Prabhupada would talk about that. Not to be inimical towards anyone, not to have any enemies. Of course, it's one of the qualities listed by Kapila Dev. Ajata Shatrava Shanta Shadava Sadabhushanam. Next one is to be simple. Simple-hearted. That means doesn't mean simple tongue, but to be very innocent, like childlike. Very, very important. And you see that Prabhupada had all these different qualities. To support, next one is to support servants or subordinates. That means that one should not think oneself better than others, or that others are meant to be one's servants, or others are meant to serve one. But as Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur would say, Dasosmi, when someone offered him obeisances, he said, I'm simply a servant. Gopi Bharta Padakamala Dasa Dasanu Dasa. So, and Bhisma Dev said to attain these qualities, he gives us the process. He says, to get freedom from anger, one should learn how to forgive. Think about that. These are very important instructions, which I often meditate upon. You get freedom from anger, you forgive. Try to see from the other person's point of view, the perspective of the other person. That's called, perspective taking. Next one is to be free from unlawful desires. Here's a big one. One should not make plans for material enjoyment. Because we often have these plans, that, I'm going to enjoy this vacation. Krishna conscious vacation is all right. You can make a plan, go to the holy town or something like that. I'm going to really go skiing wherever. Or I see this beautiful girl or handsome man. And then you make this whole plan projecting your whole future. And you discover after you go for it, it was different. So, in other words, to live at the present, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, trust no future, however pleasant. And don't live in the past, but just live in the present. Be Krishna conscious now. It's like the story Prabhupada told about the potter who was making plans to become very rich. You know the story? Yeah. He's making a pot, and he thought he'd sell this, get 2 pots, get 4 pots, get 8 pots, 2 to the 10th power, 100th power. I'll become very rich. And then, all he had was the ingredients for 1 pot. And then he was thinking, when I become very rich, I'm going to get married, and if my wife doesn't listen to me, I'll kick her. And with that kicking motion, he kicked the first pot and destroyed his initial investment. By spiritual culture, one can conquer sleep. In other words, if one has a goal, a spiritual goal, you have a reason for getting up in the morning. Many people don't have a reason to get up in the morning. You think you get up in the morning, you see the deities. I get the chance to see the deities. I think like that in the morning. I come to Mangalarti. Wow, I'm so fortunate. Think of your good fortune. Be grateful. Right? Wow, I'm so fortunate. I get to see Radha Kanta in the morning. Isn't that amazing? We greeted the deities this morning. I'm just amazed at how merciful and beautiful Krishna is. Isn't it? They're radiating compassion. You want blessings, you want compassion, and you're not getting out of bed? You think you're going to get compassion from your bed? I mean, God is standing there, Krishna is standing there, and right around he's blessing you with pure devotional service, and you have the covers over your head? What stupidity. Sorry about that, for those who don't go to Mongology. Anyway, but at least come to greet the deities in the morning. So, let me go through, because I don't have much time. I'll be speaking too long. By tolerance, one can conquer desires and avarice. In other words, you just tolerate. Vachovegam, manasat prodavegam. All these things are in the Shastras too. Vachovegam, manasat prodavegam, jivavegam, udapashtavegam. So the pushings of the senses, I gotta do this. The mind, the senses, the anger, tongue, belly, genitals. You just tolerate it, It goes away. It does go away. It really does go away. But if you give in to it, it's like throwing petrol or gasoline on a fire. All right, disturbances from various diseases can be, here's a big one you're not going to follow. Disturbances from various diseases can be avoided by regulated diets. Sorry about that one. Anyway, it was very silent here. What did he say about regulate? I'm not going to be specific about that. By self-control, one can be free from false hopes. False hopes is sometimes I call them false expectations about the material world. We should have real expectations. What is the expectation we should have? I'm going to get old. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. People will hate me. Some people may like me. People who like me maybe hate me after some time. Isn't it? You have unrealistic expectations about this world, go on forever, and everyone will love me. Like I had an expectation when I first started accepting disciples, the disciples would listen to me. That turned out to be an oxymoron, a contradiction, submissive disciple, it's a contradiction. So you have these expectations, You take sannyas, you'll be a pure devotee, Isn't it? You have this conception, you take sannyas and you're renounced just by getting a danda. If dandas could make people renounce, I would give everyone a danda. Right? It doesn't work like that. Money can be saved by avoiding undesirable association, Grandfather Bhisma said. Because you have undesirable association, your other desires increase because they're pushing you to want something, to keep up with the Joneses, as they say, to keep up with the Prabhus. By practice of yoga, one can control hunger. Yoga means basically moderation, according to Krishna and Bhagavad Gita. Worldliness can be avoided by culturing the knowledge of impermanence, which is Prabhupada did with us quite a bit. How often did Prabhupada talk about how temporary this material world is, how fleeting our desires are? So you can actually see Prabhupada followed all these different injunctions. Even though Prabhupada didn't specifically write them all down at one time, but Prabhupada was a perfect example of what Grandfather Bhisma is talking about. Dizziness can be conquered by rising up, unless you have some disease. False arguments can be conquered by factual ascertainment. So Prabhupada was expert in proper arguments. Talkativeness can be avoided by gravity and silence. I often say that we should have 2 ears and 1 mouth and use the ears twice as much as the mouth, which I'm not doing right now. By spiritual prowess, one can become fearless. Abhaya Sattva Samshuddhi Jnana Yoga Bhavasati. And the final one is, perfect knowledge can be obtained by self-cultivation and reading Bhagavad Gita and associating with great saints and persons. So these are some of the lessons. There's a lot more in the full edition of Mahabharata that Grandfather Bhisma is one of the largest, if not the largest section of the Mahabharata, Grandfather Bhisma's instructions for the bout, when he's lying on the bed. before he leaves this world. A bed of arrows. So, anybody have any questions? I covered a lot and went pretty fast.
Wonderful.
So, any questions or comments about Grandfather Bhisma's history? Yes.
Maharaj, thank you. The question
Speak loud.
the question comes to my mind. I always respected Grandfather Bhisma because of his truthfulness, and I wonder if the Mahabharata would have come out, way different, maybe even boring, if he hadn't kept his promises. Because I think in the spiritual world, like you have Chandravali, she's not exactly siding with Radharani.
Yeah.
It's all for Krishna's satisfaction. So the question that comes up mostly is, so consequentialism, how do we always know there's going to be a good or bad result? Like how do we
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, you're asking two questions. Shouldn't he have actually continued doing what he was doing because that caused the fulfillment of Krishna's plan? That's your first question. And my answer is yes, it was actually Krishna's pastime. So I'm not really directly criticizing Grandfather Bhisma, because we can say as a pure devotee, he was under Yogamaya and acted in such a fashion like that. That's the way I would, from a different angle of vision, I would explain it like that. Because he is a Mahajan, he's under Yogamaya. I mean, like Grandfather, like even Lord Brahma, even after he saw Krishna, got angry at the four Kumaras because they wouldn't get married. And so that's also Yogamaya. So one has to be very careful of criticizing a pure devotee like that. So Krishna's desire was like that, and yes, if he had not done that, then Krishna's plan would not have been fulfilled, which was very important. Krishna, if you read the 8th chapter, the 8th canto of the Bhagavatam, you'll see that the demons had taken shelter on the earth planet in Kshatriya families, and Krishna came down and wanted to kill basically all the Kshatriyas, at least the demoniac Kshatriyas. So that was, Grandfather Bhisma was part of that plan. And, like you also see, like the story of the Tulsi Shalagram Vivaha, where great devotees are cursing great devotees, Radharani's cursing great devotees. But this is all an interaction and a leela of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from a different angle. But I was commenting on what the Mahabharata says and also what Prabhupada said about Grandfather Bhisma and the food cooked by non-devotees. Because there's also lessons there. In addition to being a leela and the desire of the Lord that Grandfather Bhisma would act like that, Grandfather Bhisma is teaching us lessons about how to act in our own lives and what not to do. Because, when we're in Maya, we're really in Maya. I mean, maybe not you, but when I'm in Maya, I'm really in Maya. It's part of Krishna's plan that I'm in Maya today. We see this sometimes, some ISKCON authority will yell at a devotee, and they'll say to the devotee, Krishna wanted me to yell at you. Do you hear that? Is Krishna's plan that I would chastise you? No. You lost control of your senses. You're not Grandfather Bhisma. So, does that answer the question? Yeah, and it's a good point. It's a very good point you brought out. Yes, it was important that Grandfather Bhisma take the wrong side in the battle course, etc. So Krishna's objective could be there to Prityanaya Sadhanam Vinashaya Shatushkutam.
Yeah, also because when Satyavati asked him to marry the Chittavira's wives, a lot of people have criticized him because he stuck to his vow, but we wouldn't have had Dhritarashtra and Pandu. It would have been a whole different scenario.
Yeah. So it was Krishna's plan. And as far as him marrying or not marrying, that I'm not really finding him fault. Well, I'm not finding fault with him in any case, but the main fault I was finding, well, hopefully I'm not finding fault, but the main criticism was that he didn't stop the disrobing of Draupadi. And that's the main and the gambling match like that.
That was an excuse to kill him. That's
Yeah.
what Krishna used.
Yeah, that was an excuse to kill him. And also, but Kripacharya, not only Grandfather Bhisma, but Kripacharya and Dronacharya also also their minds became contaminated, Prabhupada said, by eating food cooked by non-devotees. So Prabhupada used that as a teaching moment for us. You know, there's a Leela going on, there's the Krishna's plan going on, but there's also teaching moments, which is what I try to concentrate on. And that teaching moment is be very careful what you eat. And I experienced that. You know, if you eat something that someone doesn't have the right consciousness, it affects you tremendously. You know, so I'm very careful about who cooks for me, because I don't want to become demoniac. I cook for myself, that way I remain demoniac. But anyways, so a good question. So any other questions?
Maharaj, what is the edition of the Mahabharata that you're
It's a
referring
Ganguly edition. It's the full translation. And according to Rinananda Maharaj, it's actually the most accurate.
Ganguly?
Ganguly, yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of these books, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana that I read, full edition, the Gita Press Ramayana, are actually written in Old English and a little hard for people to understand. Old English is almost like Shakespearean English. And it takes a little bit of concentration to read, but it's the ISKCON versions are extremely condensed, and so I really want to hear Grandfather Bhisma's instructions and hear all the details. Of course, at the same time, Rinananda Maharaj mentioned, and I agree with it, that the Mahabharata, and also Madhvacharya said, the Mahabharata has actually been contaminated because hasn't been passed. Well, it makes me peaceful. There's 84 different versions of the Mahabharata, and they've actually been contaminated because they haven't been passed down to the cyclic succession. So there's a lot of difference in the details. Not the essential story is always there. For example, the South Indian version of the Mahabharata, you have Satyavati and Parasharamuni getting married in a regular marriage ceremony, instead of having a kid in the middle of the Ganges River. So there's a lot of difference in the different versions of the Mahabharata. And Sripad Madhvacharya stated in his commentary in the Mahabharata, Tattparatra Nirnaya, that the Mahabharata has been changed, things have been taken out, things have been added, and etc. like that. So, but I suggest reading it because there's a lot you can learn from it on different levels if you have the time to read it. Yes. Yeah.
If I had not been on the wrong side, if he had not had to be shot full of arrows and killed, to die at a later date, but by Arjuna and so on, if that had not happened, then he could not have consoled Yudhishthira. He was the only person.
Right.
Even Krishna couldn't console Yudhishthira. So Bhisma, and so he, having been on the receiving end, been on the wrong side, and having been so dear to Arjuna, or to Yudhishthira, he could console him.
Yes.
And have the opportunity to give that teaching.
Yes, that's why it was all the Lord's plan to have it like that. That's true. I mean, you can see Krishna's hand behind everything. All I was talking about was some of the lessons for ourselves that can be learned from one angle of vision. The Mahabharata can be examined from many different angles of vision. And certainly Bhisma was under the influence of Yogamaya, being a pure devotee of the Lord. And even his attempted stealing of the Kamadhenu by Vasishtha Muni was actually part of the plan of the Lord. Like you have in the Tulsi Shalagram Viva, where there's the cursing of Subal, right? And so, Subal is getting angry at Radharani. Radharani curses him to become a demon. You could say, what's happening? These pure devotees. So these are all pastimes. But even within the pastimes, there's lessons to be learned, and the acharyas deal with those lessons. And to me, the lessons from the Mahabharata, especially, the thing about eating food, which Prabhupada actually spoke more about than the Leela portion. Especially, well, it sounds like. A Rakshasa is coming.
Oh God. The earth is just
I know they're pounding the lands for the
Ristasura.
So Prabhupada actually spent more time talking about the lessons. And one of the first things he actually posted in the temple was one should not eat food cooked by people not Christian conscious. That's one of the first things Prabhupada posted. So, like Prabhupada was really emphasizing us keeping purity. And obviously there's pastimes and grandfather Bhisma and Dronacharya, Kripacharya, whatever their internal position was in relationship with Krishna, that's another issue. But these are important lessons. And like Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu stated when he was asked, what is the quality of a Vaishnava? The first thing he said was a satsangachage Vaishnavachar, which is the Vaishnava avoids bad association. And so that's the lesson that I glean from it. So just look at something from different angles of vision. Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about that story. Right? In the time when that, I was eating food prepared by, non-devotees, so
Yeah.
therefore. But the way I heard that story was, I just want to
Yeah.
concur if it's correct what I'm saying, because I don't want to give a class and say it and it's not right.
Okay.
So, after Bhisma had pacified Yudhisthira with all
Right.
those eloquent teachings, I've heard that at that point Draupadi scoffed and said, "Oh, so many eloquent words you're saying. Why couldn't you say something when they were
Yeah.
trying to
That's
destroy
true.
me?"
That's true.
And then so Bhishma replied, "I'm very sorry, Mataji. I couldn't do anything because I was eating food prepared by demons."
Yeah.
Is that the right time in the story when that?
In one of the editions of the Mahabharata, it happens like that, yeah. Yeah, Prabhupada wouldn't say anything that wasn't shastric. That's true. And he was eating food. And as far as Dronacharya, it wasn't just the food with Dronacharya. It's described in the Mahabharata that he was attached. He had taken the work, basically, of a Shudra, even though he was a Brahmin, and that contaminated him because he was... There's the whole story in the Mahabharata that he couldn't maintain his family, Ashwatthama, his son, and everybody else. So he wanted to become the teacher so he would get employment. And so when you get employment, and there's nothing wrong with employment, I'm not criticizing that, but you become controlled by the person who's employing you. Yeah, whenever there's some financial exchange, then the person who's giving you money is actually controlling you to a certain extent. And so therefore, of course, devotees should sometimes have jobs, and that's not the point. But their preaching should not be contaminated by financial considerations. That's the real point. That if I was getting, let's say, I'm sitting here giving class, and Dweeb Bhuj is giving me a salary, which is not. Somebody gives me something, but I'm thinking, I gotta please him. I can't say anything wrong because I'll be fired. Like Bhagavad Saptaha people, for example. Prabhupada comments on that. They could do these Bhagavad Saptahas, and there's financial consideration. So they actually put up, many of them, not all of them, they put on an act because they're going to get money for it, And so if someone's preaching activities have any financial consideration to them, that's a contamination. That's a contamination. One should preach, and if someone gives a donation, Hare Krishna, it's nice. And if someone doesn't, I'm not going to change what I say. But still, so someone has to have a job. This is brought out in the Jaiva Dharma. In the Jaiva Dharma, there's, Rajanath was his name. And he's going to his guru, and he says, Guru Maharaj, I'm giving Bhagavatam class, and I'm maintaining myself by Bhagavatam teaching. And the guru says, no. No, you should not do this. You should maintain yourself by doing some job or something, some business on the side, even though he's a Brahmin. And so it doesn't mix with your preaching. If your preaching is your financial means of making money, book distribution is a different thing. So Prabhupada encouraged that. But as far as let's say if I'm preaching to people, then I discriminate. Well, I'm going to preach to Dwi Buj since he's so rich, but Yogendra, the hell with him. He doesn't even have a house, right? All right, I'll preach to Maharani. But anyways, so if I, because those thoughts could come in the mind of someone, right? I'm going to go, for example, if I heard that Bill Gates was interested in Krishna consciousness, I'd be over his house in 10 seconds. And all of you, who the hell cares about you? You're just Okies from Finoki or something. So one should not allow that to enter into one's mind like that. And so that was the case with Drona. There's a whole story about Drona wanting, he couldn't even, at least there was the story there that he couldn't give milk to Ashwatthama. Some of you may be aware of that story. And he, and then, anyway, so he was taking employment. So there's the external reason. Yes, internally Krishna wanted it to happen. Therefore, Pratyanaya Sadhunam, all the demons were killed. Jai Haribol. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that, for as far as keeping internal purity. Yeah.
In this part you talked about should never leave the holy Dham and come across the ocean. Dhamma said the first time he met Srila Prabhupada, he came into the room, the first words out of Prabhupada's mouth was, "Why have you come here?" Prabhupada said, "I've come to give something. Why have you come here?" So Dhamma said, "I knew I'd met my spiritual master at that moment."
Yeah, Prabhupada was able to demonstrate the essence of Vedic principles, or Krishna conscious principles. And so many times people, they want to revert back to a so-called Vedic past, which really wasn't the Vedic past, a ritualistic Vedic past. And there's a whole group of people in India who are just want to go back there. And they're actually Americans. They're not even from India. They're the newbie Brahmins. So I don't want to get too much into the politics about that. Yeah, one more question.
She has a question.
Gee, I can't see. Can't see.
You said about money part. So if you have some devotional service, and if you earn some money from outside, and you tell someone, "I will pay you something," and you do for me, is it correct to do?
I refuse to testify on the grounds that may tend to incriminate me. You take the Fifth Amendment? Can you do that here? Well, people need to be maintained. Yeah, just to speak about that subject matter, people do have some financial necessities. If I was a pujari and I had family members who were dying, then I might need some financial remuneration. Not a salary, but financial remuneration to meet my needs. We all have different needs. So that should not contaminate one's consciousness, but at the same time we have to meet the devotee's needs. And I think that's important too, that, I'll be able to do arti, but I have these needs. So I don't think, each case has to be examined individually. And usually I don't find people asking for extraordinary amounts of money, like $5,000 for each arti. I remember, it's funny, like Prabhupada, the first time I saw Prabhupada was in Gainesville, Florida, So Amarendra, you'll know Amarendra? He was like the vice president, and Srinivasa Maharaj was the president. So he wanted to bring Prabhupada to Gainesville. This is 1971. And so Prabhupada said, I'll come if they give me an honorarium. So Amarendra, he actually got the student body to give $1,000 to Prabhupada.
Wow.
Which at that time is worth what? How much now? 10,000 or something, or 5,000 or whatever it is. And Amarendra, he was a student radical leader before he joined the Hare Krishna movement. And so Prabhupada came for like 2 or 3 days. That's the first time we got a chance to see Prabhupada, 1971.
I mean, the university, they cut a check for Prabhupada.
Yeah, they cut a check for Prabhupada, $1,000. Prabhupada gave them that challenge. But it's not that Prabhupada was interested in money, but Prabhupada wanted to see if they'd hear nicely.
Yeah, sure.
So another time Prabhupada said, we should charge, one public program said we should charge money, and they'll take it seriously. Because if someone pays something, then they're going to listen. If something's free, and I've seen that before, sometimes when you give out books for free, you might probably saw that in the airport sometimes, they'd end up in the garbage. But when someone would pay something for it, Prabhupada really wanted people to pay for the books. Because when you pay for it, you really take it seriously. It's an investment. I know whenever I pay for something, I make sure I use it or read it or do something with it or sell it. Because it's, it's in my mind. I put money into it, right? So, there are sometimes when there is consideration of money when dealing with things, the people will take things more seriously.
The Gainesville Food Program, it's been going on for so many years, but I think maybe 10, 12 years ago, they started charging instead of free, and it increased like double,
More people
triple
came.
the amount.
Yeah, double people came. And they were able to produce more prasadam for people. So, sometimes like restaurants where people pay for the food. Like that. So there's all sorts of considerations. I'm not against financial remunerations. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In each case has to be examined individually. Oh, yeah. Another question. Oh, yawning. Okay. So I guess we should end now because it's time for prasadam, and I will get accused of cruel and unusual punishment, which is against the Constitution of the United States, right? Because I'm keeping you from prasadam. Okay, all glory is to His divine grace. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai. I'll let everybody see the deities and everybody here. Wait a second. Here's everybody. Big crowd. And the deities. Okay. Oops. See what someone's chatted.
Jai Prabhupada.